Picking up where we left off outside, fortunately we are at the very beginning. I like to joke around about it because you can have major speakers in from all over the country and you can talk about Jesus or the church or holy things, but you will almost always pack the house when you talk about the devil and the demonic for some reason. So thank you all for coming tonight. Hopefully you get some good information about not only what has happened in the history of humanity, but also what I believe is really what's at stake right now. So, if you're in a war, and for the principles of this talk, I kind of want you to see it through that prism. That what we're talking about from the fall of the Garden of Eden all the way to the day and the moment that we're living in right now, there is a massive spiritual war that has been going on and continues, maybe now more than ever, for souls. What the devil wants is souls. And so if you think about war, know your enemy, right? And in the case of the devil, he does not want to be known. As you've probably heard, it's the old fable that the greatest trick that the devil ever played on humanity was to convince us that he didn't exist. So when we talk about the devil, when we talk about this war, most people immediately want to jump right to, well, tell us some stories about exorcisms or possession, the more fantastical end of it, and we're going to get a little bit to that at the end of this. But in order to understand what's actually going on, you have to understand the structure, if you will, of the spiritual world. So when we're dealing with God's creation, it's really sort of interesting when you think about it. You've got the angels who were created first. They are not souls. They do not have bodies. They have an intellect, will, and they're pure spirits. So when people talk about aliens and all of these different things, the legitimate thing to say is God, in fact, has made two very distinct, totally different races of beings. And I suppose on some level, right, we know them as angels, but on some level you could say that they're not extraterrestrial, but they are sort of alienistic. And they live in a world that we cannot see. Some are for us, some are against us. As we are here right now, every single one of us has at least one guardian angel. So as we are sitting in this church, there is a whole realm of the spiritual world in which our guardian angels are right here, right now with us. And maybe if we went around the church, some of you could probably tell me a story about an interaction with that angel in some way or another, something really strange that happened to you. I know I lived with Father Jaden Nelson. He's from here for 10 years, and we were talking about this one night, and he's like, and he's about as sober as it gets when it comes to, fantastical, spiritual, whatever, very intellectual man. And he said, I know mine exists. He said, I had an experience of them. And I'm like, really? I was like, this ought to be good and true. I was like, well, what happened? And he said, that, I don't know what the hill is called, but it's up by the water tower over here, kind of by St. Wentz, and it's got that just crazy drop going down. And he said he was on that hill, which I'd never really seen the hill, and it came to mind immediately when I was doing an anointing at St. Ben's. I was like, this brings to life this story. But he said he was just going, bat out of hell, no pun intended, fast as he could down that hill, and somebody blew through one of those intersections towards the bottom. It was a white Taurus, he said, and as he came at the Taurus, would have killed him. As he was about to hit the Taurus, all of a sudden his angel's face appeared right in front of his. And he said he just grabbed him, and he said, I passed right through the Taurus. He's like, I came out on the other side, angel smiled at me, was gone. The Taurus almost was in an accident because he saw it happen, and everybody stopped, and he was completely untouched. So not only are they there, but they have tremendous power, and their main job really is to be worshiping God, or one of them, while you are not, praying for the salvation of your soul, offering God what he wants. But that's just the level of the guardians, and they're on the very lowest level, okay? Because there's 9 choirs of these things. So just to go through them real quick, and it's not a talk on angels, there's the seraphim, and the seraphim exist in a realm that is closest to God. Isaiah talks about them being, in flight with 2 wings, covering their face with 2 wings, and worshiping with 2 wings. They have 6 wings, and they are totally on fire, and on fire with the love of God. That race of angels or that realm, I should say, of angels did not fall. So they think that Gabriel is the commander of them, and they didn't fall. The cherubs are underneath them. They're kind of like God's warriors. The thrones, which are very interesting when you read about them, there's apparently some realm of gates that we pass through on our way to heaven. There are these thrones that guard, like they're really on a throne, they guard these portals. You have the dominions or the lordships, the virtues or the strongholds, the powers or the authorities, principalities or the rulers. More of the principalities fell in the fall than any other realm. Then you have the archangels, and they may be a realm unto themselves, but another going theory, which I like better, is that they are literally the commanders of the other realm. Right? So even though they're their own realm, like they're the commanders of all of it, and at the end of it you have the guardians. So, for example, getting back to Gabriel, they think he's the commander of the seraphs, and also the guardian angel for the Blessed Virgin Mary. The interesting part about Lucifer is he didn't belong to any of them. He was actually from a human point of understanding, he was sort of the president or the ruler of all the realms. So he was the highest angel that there was, and his name, Lucifer, means the bearer of light. Meaning to a certain extent, obviously he's just a drop of dust compared to God, but he would have had the wisdom of God. And there's a lot of different writing when you get into it, but they think some of it, when they talk about envy, he was dearly loved by Christ, and when he found out that Christ was going to create a family for himself of lowercase g gods, he was so unbelievably envious of it that in that envy he began to hate God and subsequently, obviously, hate us. One of the great sort of telltale snapshots of this is St. Sister Faustina Kowalska, who brought us the Divine Mercy image, and she saw so many things. But she said they were created instantaneously. Like we weren't, right? We know of evolution and all this other stuff. The angels are boom, they're there. And in that moment, they had a moment of free choice in which they could either serve God or rebel against God, because they had to make that free choice. Now we have to understand that even the lowest of every angel of all of heaven has infinitely more knowledge than the smartest theologian that's ever lived, probably a combination of all of them. So it's tough for us to understand, but when they made their choice, they made it so unbelievably perfectly and against God that it was absolutely irrevocable, and it was in eternity, and so it's done. If the gates of heaven were open to them, they do not want to be in heaven even now. Faustina says the greatest torture that they have ever experienced in hell is, in our creed, when Jesus descended into hell, as he came into hell and all of hell had to kneel before him, she says that they would have suffered any torture for all eternity versus having to kneel before him. That's how much they hate God, that's how much they hate heaven, and that's how much they hate us. So if you want to know what this war is all about, from the very onset, it was about conquering us and kicking God out. And again, I'm just sort of giving you a snapshot of it, but when we fell, we not only booted God out of creation, we cut our link with him, but there is no in-between. We were either going to worship him or we were going to worship Satan, or at least be under his dominion. And he knew that. Right? So even when the angels fell, he knows that he can't be God. But he can be God of the fallen realm of angels. He knows that he can't be the Lord as Christ is over all of humanity, because he's nothing compared to him. But he knows if he can get us to fall, certainly in the Garden of Eden, that God would no longer be here, and then he is the most powerful entity in this realm with us. So he now will rule us. And so when you think about all of the old ancient religions, the paganism as we call it, all of the different gods, right? Zeus, Thor, you name it, Nike even, all of those, behind those gods were, imaginary gods, false gods, were demonic, cherubs, thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, and so forth, that want to be worshipped. They have power in this realm, and for those who will worship them, they will give their power to them. And so by the time Christ comes on the scene, if you can really picture it, the only race of people that existed that even really knew of the one true God was the Jews, who he had revealed himself to with his desires and his law and his principles, creating this holy nation. So the purpose of their existence was to get the Son of God into the world so that he would be able to overthrow Lucifer while he was here. Now, the angels didn't know what was going to happen. Certainly the demonic didn't know what was going to happen. As far as they were concerned, the only thing that they had to worry about was overthrowing the Jewish nation, so this Meshach or Messiah couldn't get into the world to liberate humanity, whatever that even was. It's a really great depiction in Mel Gibson's Passion when he's, sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the devil suddenly is there and he says to him, "You cannot do this. The sins of the world, no man can do this." And at the end of it, he's like, "Who are you?" Right? He doesn't know who he is. So the way this works is it's not just like Jesus dying. I mean, really think this through, right? And this is a whole other lecture of itself. An all-loving, all-merciful, all-powerful, all-knowing Father sends his Son, who he loves more than anything, the only begotten Son from all eternity, to appease him by being tortured and crucified. And after he's been tortured and crucified, God the Father, who's all-loving and all-merciful, suddenly is not angry anymore, and now he can tolerate us. I ask you, does that make any sense at all? And the answer to that is absolutely not. So something is going on with Jesus where he's going to have to do that. And certainly there is a just sentence that he's going to pay for all of us that fulfills the justice of God. But it's not like God, because that happens, is suddenly like not angry anymore, like a father that wanted to beat us but actually loved us, so he crucified. I mean, it doesn't line up. What does line up is that once God does something that the devil never thought in a million years that God would do, that the infinite, triune, all-eternal, all-powerful God would humble himself to become flesh, something that the devil despises in us, right? We are lower than they are. He is way more powerful than we are. As a matter of fact, the only person that could overthrow him in this realm was God. If a human could, they would have, but we can't. So this stranglehold God comes through the back door, the Trojan horse, if you will. Hides himself in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a 15-year-old girl in northern Israel who was totally dirt poor. Even if he was to come, right, the devil would automatically assume he was coming in great glory. He didn't. Then he's a carpenter's son, and he's hidden his whole life until he makes his advent. And if you look at the scriptures, and again, this is a whole nother talk, but if you look at the scriptures, the devil has names for him, right? These demons, we know you're the Son of God, but they don't know what that means. It literally looks like this is the most powerful, the most perfect, the last prophet to the Jewish race, which was supposed to take them and glorify them. And if they can just get this one killed, he's the last one. And a lot of Jesus' parables, I swear, are almost directed towards the spiritual realm. Right? As if he's trying to coax them to repent, right? When he says, look, this is the heir. Kill him and everything is ours. Well, that doesn't really pertain necessarily, a little bit to us, but it really pertains to them. If we can kill this last one, then in fact, all of the human race will be, and hell will be under our dominion for all eternity, and Lucifer gets his way, and he becomes the god of this realm. And heaven is somewhere out there. So Jesus hides himself, and you've heard me talk a little bit about this before, but he gets to the cross. And not only did he humble himself, the devil never thought in a million years, if this was God, then there is no way he would be able to overthrow me, and yet he's being tortured, spat upon, crucified, he's dying, and it's the ambush predator, right? He's pulling them all in to the sin, connecting them to not only the fall of the human race, but now the death and crucifixion of the Son of God. So they are guilty eternally of our fall, and they are guilty eternally of killing the Son of God, who cannot be killed. Death cannot hold him. And so the moment that he dies, as they're rejoicing out of that body, like, whoo, suddenly it's the second person to the Trinity. Can you see in your mind's eye the fear that they must have had in that moment? Kneel before me! Because it's over. And that's what Paul talks about in his letters, right? He led them away in a spectacle. And really he's referring to the Roman army when they would conquer somebody. Caesar would go first. There was Jesus in this triumphal, resurrected procession. And in the end is all the demonic caged up and judged, condemned to hell. So, they still have influence over us only in as much as that we will give it to them, right? Because what Jesus does is pours God's life back into humanity, deifies us, which means making us into gods, because it's the Father through the Son's life, through baptism and the rest of the sacraments that's now in us, in which he has no hold on us whatsoever. So I ask you, now the war has changed. He has ultimately been defeated, but the human race still needs to come into existence. And the only way we're all coming into existence, according to what God built, is through natural birth, marriage, and following the timeline all the way to the end. And so after Christ, the war changes. We are no longer under this demonic stranglehold, but we have been liberated. But in order to be fully liberated, we now have another life that we have to enter into. Getting back to the homily even tonight, to believe is to conform your life to this thing. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. He died for my sins. He killed all humanity on the cross, raises all humanity up in his own body at the resurrection, pours the resurrected life into our humanity so that we too now follow him through that portal into heaven. However, we still have our lives to live. Now, the fascinating part about this is you see the war from Christ on wax and wane, right? Immediately after the resurrection, the apostles are sent out, and it's a bloodbath for the first 500 years. 300 to 500 years, right? The devil is doing everything in his power to kill every Christian that there is because he's trying to eradicate it he can. Then we get our stronghold. That leads into the higher element of the sort of peak of it in the Middle Ages. You know, from the year 18 to 1200, saints for a dime a dozen, and the entire earth was Catholic. Then it starts to wane because of the sins of men, right? Like we're starting to disconnect again, and that hits the Reformation. And the Reformation, you know, when Paul talks about the catechon, though he who is holding it back, the church is what's holding Lucifer back, because he has no power over it. But once that line is broken, and we go from 3 Reformed religions to 58,000, nobody knows what the truth is any longer, and so we begin to scatter. And the more we scatter, the more powerful he becomes, because we are bringing less of God's power into the world, which is what we must do with our free choice. We're not robots. We have all the arms in the world and the power that we need, but we have to use it. And so as we disconnect from the Eucharist, especially the sacrament of reconciliation, people aren't even being baptized anymore, right? They don't, even if they are, they don't know how to live it. And so we have way more people now from the early 1900s to the time that we're living in that are actively living in the state of mortal sin, which is worship of him, versus in the state of grace, bringing more of Christ's power in the world and changing it like they did up until that point. Look at the change that happened on earth from the resurrection to the year 1500. Humanity made more progress in that time than they did in the however many thousands of years that came before it. Why? Because the Holy Spirit and through the church, in the church, was in the world. So the legions of the demonic have one objective, and that is to convince you that evil is good and good is evil. John talks a little bit about it in his letters. And that you don't need Christ. So everybody thinks, right, possession, right, or infestation, or whatever the thing might be, is that is there, but so far off the main grid of the war. He is part of your life every day in and day out, and what he is trying to convince you of, first, is mortal sin. Actually, it's venial, which goes into mortal, and then once you're in the mortal sin, and many mortal sins have huge addictive qualities to them, he wants you to believe that there is no way that God will ever love you or forgive you. And so you need to disconnect and embrace the world and go in that direction, which then he's got you for all eternity. You die in that state, and Lucifer will be your ruler for all eternity in hell with the rest of the demons that are there. So from the early 1900s until now, we have been experiencing the most vicious campaign that the devil has waged since early Christianity and before. Don't believe me? 2 billion children have been killed by abortion. So the evil's good, good's evil, right? So all of a sudden now, the very thing that's brought to, designed to make life, well, we use contraception and we make it not work right. The very life inside of the womb, which is designed to, perpetuate the human race and bring tremendous happiness to humanity and life itself, we're now slaughtering inside the womb. Marriage, which is like the most unbelievable one of them that God ever made for procreation and lovemaking and family and the greatest good that there is now turned into living together, gay unions, and transgenderism. And the entire sexual revolution at its core is literally based upon evil being good and good being evil. And the list, everyone, goes on, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So much so that in the time that we're living now, you are seen to be insane if you believe objective truth. And those who are clearly in the subjective insanity that we're living in right now are seen as the norm. And so those of us who are following, connected to Christ, are whittled down to the remnant that's left, that's waging this war, that we feel like we're on the outs. The world is going mad, and that's the demonic, and that is their goal. As you've heard me talk about before, there is no better time in the history of humanity for an antichrist than the time that we're living in right now. So how did this sort of happen along the timeline? Well, the only way that he gets into the world to the level that he's at is via human choice. So literally, the more we choose for the good, heck, every Holy Communion and confession you do, the more we win the war. Because it's through your heart into the substance of humanity comes grace. However, on the other end of it, we also have that realm of demonic followers who understand that the devil is the ruler of this world and can give you his power and want it. So, back in the early 1900s, you had Aleister Crowley, who was dubbed the wickedest man on earth, wrote basically all of the satanic worship and magic manuals of that time, and in the 1920s had a massive following of people that were practicing black magic and occult worship. As a matter of fact, a lot of the bands of the 1980s, Ozzy Osbourne being top of the list, reference him. The Beatles reference him. Like, these people were using his demonic influence and magic within their music as a seance to all of humanity. And I could go on forever about that. But he was the first, died as a heroin addict, and the last words from his mouth were, "I am greatly perplexed," as he took his last breath. So whatever he was seeing, God helped him out. Anton LaVey then, in the 1980s, rewrote the Satanic Bible and founded the Church of Satan, and there was a massive surge, maybe somebody that lived through it, in the 1980s of Satanism, period. It was coming through the music, it was coming through the culture, but it was also coming like locally. Down in the river bottoms by the University of Mary, there was more satanic worship in the state of North Dakota than we have ever seen before. In Minot, where I just came from, there's a reason it's named the Magic City. The Masons named it because there was more Satanism in that city than any other city in all of North Dakota. To date, and this is coming from an exorcist, every now and then you'll find a murder, especially during the 80s, in that area without a head. Because when you do a satanic murder, you take the head and offer it to Satan later. Those are the types of things going on, and that was seen as like super fantastical, right? All of that then gives way to all of the occult and paganism and lawlessness that presently exists in our culture that is out in the open, and nobody's even talking about it, right? The music Grammys or awards that we do, many of those crazy, like satanic-looking dances and performances with the new artist are seances in which they are indoctrinating that new artist into the occult. And when I speak like that, or this will be online later, people are going to be like, this guy's out of his mind, which is exactly what they want you to say. Because one of the hard and fast rules within the demonic war that we're in, that God has, is before they do something, they have to tell you what they're going to do. So it can be a movie that projects the future. It can be right in front of your face, a satanic seance indoctrinating a new musician. It can be whatever, but they have to show you. And they do it out in the open. They are hiding in absolute plain sight right now because from the late 1800s, really to the 1900s, they've indoctrinated humanity and all of these things that we just think are normal. So evil is not decreasing, but it's increasing. And because of the dimming of the practice of the faith, even the power of the church and exorcisms is beginning to lessen. What used to take one exorcism is now taking like 50 because of the lack of practice of our faith in the world. So that brings us to the point then of a little bit more of the sensational end of the devil, not just working with temptation in mortal sin in your life or an indoctrination of a culture, but direct and active demonic influence in the life or a family of a person. They are temptation, as we've talked about, demonic obsession or oppression, demonic infestation, and demonic possession. So I'm just going to go through these quickly tonight to kind of give you just a snapshot of what this looks like. In order to understand the demonic on this level, all one needs to really consider is fishing. Right? And fish are extremely stupid, and compared to the fallen angels, we are extremely dumb. Hence, we needed Jesus, God himself, to overthrow them and teach us how to actively live correctly, because our compulsion is to live in our lower nature. And so obsession is basically being hooked by the devil into some sort of sin. Now, in the case of obsession, the person moves beyond temptation, right? Because we're all tempted, and every personality type is different. We're all tempted by different sins. Of all the deadly sins, right, there's something that we gravitate towards more than others. And usually, for the person who's fighting the war, which gives great glory to God, we are fighting, try to live virtue, we fall, we end up in the confessional, which gives God more glory than had we not sinned at all, because we humble ourselves, and then we're fighting, and he cannot beat that. So if you're going to regular confession, you might have a pretty ingrained sin, but every time you do that, it's like a big foot right to Lucifer's face, in which he just gets plowed over. More about that in a little bit. But the obsession starts diving into the realm of spiritual and psychological physical addiction. Now, the one I'm going to name that's probably the clearest underneath this is pornography. But drugs play a big role. Abortion is another one of these. Sexual abuse, even though it's not the person's sin, but it can do this. All of these create what we call, think of the fishing, a demonic hook. And so it goes beyond the level of temptation, and it either hooks something inside of your mind and your soul, or it breaks something. So if we think about a little child being sexually abused, right? We've all been through some level of trauma and abuse in our life. But if you think of the soul of a child as like a little beautiful crystal ball of light. We were all there, right? And we go through school and people are dinging on it all the time, right? Maybe you got bullied, or maybe you weren't the guy or lady that you wanted to be, or maybe somebody you thought had a better life. And it's like tink, 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 tink. And coming to Mass and living your faith, especially once you start receiving your Holy Communion, it's like, and then God heals it and heals it and heals it. Something like, being sexually raped when you're 5 is like a sledgehammer coming in and just going. And into that utter destruction, not always, but into that utter destruction comes the evil one. And unless we get through counseling and spirituality and confession and all of these different resources, that individual healed up, they will be affected on a much deeper level by sin in the area of sexuality than other people are. Right, so when we look out into our culture, a lot of what's going on with the transgender, curious, gay movement, not all of it, but a lot of it is people that have been sexually abused when they're little, that have not been healed. And so I tell people, obviously that's an evil movement, right? But the people are not our enemies. So we don't know their life. We don't know why they're where they're at. And many times now they don't either, right? So it's hate the sin, love the sinner. I cannot stress this enough. We, everyone, are not our enemy. And I don't care if it's Adolf Hitler or whoever it is. These are people who have been so convinced of what the demonic has sold them that they're overtaken by it. In the case of Hitler, probably possessed. But no human, we're all one family. They are our enemies, okay? So if you think of, outside of that, if you think of like pornography, right? You know, you start, and this happens on the news every now and then. You'll find like the T-ball coach of whatever small town was caught with 2 terabytes of child pornography. And we're like, how did that, what happened to Bob? Well, Bob's a pervert. Well, hold up. So it all starts with that, you used to have to go down to the dirty store and get the magazine, or find it in the woods or something, right? And that was like low-level pornography. Without getting into it now, every fetish and, whatever phenomenal redefinition of sexuality exists on the internet. And the way that pornography works is it's not more, it's more intense. And that's what we mean by the hook. So in the pornography consumption, suddenly the devil hooks the individual, male or female. And that's how the gentleman who's the T-ball coach ends up with 2 terabytes of child pornography. He got hooked and he got obsessed. And that obsession, that's a clear one, but it goes in a lot of ways. Greed. Like people, they can't spend a thing and they say, well, I'm just frugal and I'm conservative and all that. They got millions of dollars. Can't spend it, won't give it, nothing. They have hooked that individual with greed. It's all of the 7 deadly sins. The guy, anger is normal, but it's the husband or wife that just cannot control their anger, flies off the handle. They've been hooked. And most of the time, these people are not going to confession. And if they are, they're not confessing the sin in its totality the way it needs to be confessed. Now granted, once you're really in the obsession, psychological counseling, therapy, confession, Holy Eucharist, and there are many, many, many healing prayers that heal people of this. Release them immediately. Demonic infestation. In the case of a demon or demons have been invited into a particular space. This one I have a lot of experience with, the first 2 actually. So there will be a seance, there will be Wiccan, actual occult practices going on in a particular place, a home. Somebody demonically kills themselves as an offering to Lucifer, and many, many other things. And that happens, they move out, another family moves in, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, one family moves in, maybe good Catholics, and they're like, there's some weird stuff going on in this house, Father. I'm like, well, tell me about it. Well, this picture of Jesus flew off the wall and smashed into the other wall. I swear, when I woke up the other night, I had a vision of something. I don't know what it was. We are having just crazy nightmares. We had a great relationship and everything was going well in our family. We moved into this house and all of a sudden, all hell, no pun intended, broke loose. And many, many, many other things. And so there, your local pastor or any priest can come in and they can do a minor exorcism of the place. Sometimes it takes more than one, but usually within 1 to 3, all of that craziness is immediately gone. You can have the exorcist do it, but the exorcist usually defers to the local parish pastor. And I have done many, many, many blessings of homes. It's actually a good thing to have done. You just invite the priest over, and depending, it doesn't, or your businesses, whatever it might be, you just have a blessing of your home We sprinkle exorcised salt and exorcised holy water, creates a perimeter so nothing can get in there. Now, you're still going to be dealing with temptation and human fallenness, but that extra level of demonic infestation that can be places doesn't follow you in. So for example, right, at your workplace, let's say there's somebody that you don't even know of that's actually actively worshiping the occult, or in the occult. That person has demons all over them, and just by associating in the same areas that they are, this war that they're after you. Like when they see the good Catholic, boom! And if you're in the state of mortal sin, your shields are down and they can get you. That's why we're going to confession nonstop. Because if you're in the state of grace, your shields are up. They can tempt you, but they can't touch you. Your house is blessed. They can't even get into it because you've created a perimeter of exorcism prayers that exist in the water and the salt that doesn't allow them to enter. Finally, then, there is demonic possession. Now, this is the most serious case of demonic interaction with the soul, and I want you to remember this. It has to be chosen by the person freely. The only sort of sub-case with this, and it's hard to understand, but is that parents who are in the occult, and I'm not going to get into the ceremony because it's just too horrific, can offer their children, their young children, to the devil. And because of the power that they have as parents over them, they have the power to do that. It's almost identical to you bringing your child to be baptized. Right? So like when the Baptists believe you have to be of an age to choose this for yourself, no, you don't. It can be chosen for you by those who have blood custody over you. Well, the same thing goes with this. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but let's just use the case of Adolf Hitler, right? He wanted, and we know the Nazis were huge into demonic worship. They wanted what the devil could give to them, and they turned themselves over. So you would have to come in a demonic black mass seance and say, I want the devil to inhabit me. I give him my soul. And then there's some other crazy stuff that comes along with that, in which they desecrate the Eucharist and so forth. The best story I have, and I think I told it at the Daily Mass, but when I was in seminary, I had done UND's nursing program, and I left right from there, and I went to seminary. It's going to be a psych nurse, psychologist nurse. And when I got there, in major seminary, you have these apostolic works that are supposed to be forming you. It's like hospital ministry, school ministry, and I had done all of this. And so they were like, well, can you come up with anything that might be helpful? And I said, yeah. I said, I've often thought I'd love to do prison ministry. So this guy's thinking like down at the local slammer, maybe the jail on the weekends, people got arrested for DUI, something like that. And they were like, that's a great idea. The next thing I know, I am in a maximum security federal penitentiary. And the guy that I was working with, Nehemiah Chambers, he ended up becoming Catholic after I left. I'm hoping he became a deacon. But he had been doing this ministry as basically a self-proclaimed Christian pastor for like 20 years by the time I got. And this man was huge. He was the right tackle for Ohio State University. Big man. And so from the onset, I noticed that this guy had an anointing that I had never experienced before. He would pray over people and heal them right in that moment. And we were dealing with rapists, child molesters, murderers. I always said, it was bad enough growing up, but I was like, I'm never going to do anything that will get me put into prison. Then I joined seminary. But it was a phenomenal experience. So we're sitting around one time and I'm like, some of these people got to be possessed, Nehemiah. And he's like, oh, I can tell you they are. I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, about 10 years ago, he said, the exorcist of the Diocese of Columbus called me. And he said, what was going on is there was these murders of these children, little girls specifically. And he said, they figured out as this serial murdering was going on, it was tied to the occult. He said, they eventually caught up with the high priest of the satanic cult who was doing it, and they arrested him. And he said, so the exorcist called me, and he said, we're bringing this guy down. He is not insane. He's possessed by legion. So he said they got him in, and he said, this man was massive. And I'm looking at Nehemiah, and I'm like, how big was this guy? He said the dreadlocks coming down, big beard. And he said they locked him up, and we were, exorcist asked me to pray with him every day. He said, I need you to come in and just read this. He's like, I'm not Catholic. He said, it doesn't matter. I just need you to read those scriptures in front of him every day. So they had a room, private cell set up. It's not like the bars and things, just a room with glass around it. And they would bring the man in and they locked him with chains to the chair. Secured him very tightly. And so Nehemiah said I'd come in and I'd be across the room. And this man was on the other side and he was just staring at me. And he's like, we did this for a month. And he said, we're getting closer to the exorcism, and he would growl at me and huff at me. And he's like, part of me felt like he's just insane. And he said, one day I'm reading the scriptures in front of him, and man, this guy could pray. Best Protestant prayer I've ever heard in my life. But it was just so poetic. But he said, I'm praying there, God, Father God, come down upon this man, come down. And he said, all of a sudden, he pops up and he's like, I want to kill you. And Nehemiah said, I looked at him and he's like, well, what's stopping you? And he said he stood up right out of the chair and it was like, broke the chains. And he's coming at him and he's like, Jesus has created an abyss between you and me that I cannot pass. And he walked back and sat down. Well, at that time, the guards stormed the place. I said, were you scared? He's like, terrified now. But he's like, I knew he was possessed at that point. He said it got to the end in which the exorcist team came in and he said, they invited me to be a part of it. So it took 3 hours. He's like, lights were coming off and on. He's like, he defecated, urinated on himself, vomited numerous times. He said, I was standing over him praying. So I felt this little tap on my shoe. And he said, this giant of a man, the tears were just flowing down. He said, it was him. And he said, thank you. And he's been saved ever since. There are local incidences of this. I'm not going to get into them. Most of this stuff, obviously, is kept secret. But if you don't think demonic possession exists in our own communities, it does. If you don't think the occult exists in our communities, it does. And it's some really nasty stuff. And it's real. So when Father is sitting back saying, like, go to confession and go to Mass, I'm not talking about praise and worship. I'm talking about the salvation of your soul in a world that I know all too well that wants to destroy you for all eternity. And we have the weapons, everyone. The power of the church is the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The devil has nothing on it. Holy water, when you throw it on him in an exorcism, they'll be like, ah, it burns, it burns. You show him a miraculous medal. Exorcist friend of mine down in Texas, he said they had a throne, which is real powerful, right? This isn't like a fallen guardian. And he looked at him and they were doing the exorcism. He's like, I answer to no man. And he said, I had this miraculous medal on and I took it off. It's the one with Mary on it. And he's like, I held it out and I'm like, how about a woman? And he said, all of a sudden it snapped up and it was like, she's here, gone. And he said this peace and this cool was, you could feel the Blessed Virgin everywhere. Terrified of her. Terrified. So the power of the church is to stay in the sacraments. You don't need to make a big deal out of this as if this thing's all over the place. If you're going to Mass and you're in the state of grace and you're going to confession, you've won. You have nothing to worry about. If you find yourself like heavily struggling with certain sins, it might be some intergenerational stuff. You got to remember, a lot of people, we all go back to like the Europeans, right? Which goes back to people like the Vikings. The Vikings never lost. They were converted out of their paganism and became Christian, and that was the end of them. But they were the most pagan society and warlordish conquering nation that has ever existed. In many cases, those are our ancestors. And so when we fall away from the church, guess what? Those old demons who are still around, oh, the line's not Christian anymore. And they're right back on the scene. We have the sacramentals. We should all have crucifixes and divine mercies and holy water and rosaries in our home. Don't you remember when you were growing up? Maybe I'm aging myself, but every time Grandma and Grandma, their whole house was just like caked with this stuff. The big old wedding Bible that was always open. Not sure anybody read it, but it was there. And holy stuff. I remember as a little boy, there was holy stuff all over the place. I was always seeing pictures of Jesus and Mary and all these things. It affects our children. Prayer. The rosary isn't just some joke, right? Oh, it'd be nice if I prayed the rosary to make me holy. The rosary is like a machine gun. The bells of a church. The exorcists will tell you when they ring during the day, the reason why they're keeping time is because they're blessed, and every single demon in the city is just like, ah, every time they go off. You're praying that rosary, it's the most annoying thing in the world to them. And outside of the sacraments, Eucharistic adoration, in which Jesus fills his army with divine power and sends you out. That the sacraments are the most powerful weapon that we have. I'll tell you one last story here before I get to the end. A priest buddy of mine, there's this guy, military man, who, let's just say that, had been in the Middle East and got into private contracting and got into satanic worship and all the killing and everything else that they were doing. And God had enlightened his soul that he needed to talk to a priest. So he was talking to this priest, and he would blank in and out. And the priest is like, suddenly the demon would be there, and then he would disappear. So he somehow got possessed. So, priest being a good priest, he was like, I need you to go to confession. And he was like, okay. And so he's sitting there in the confessional, and he said it was in the name of the Father and of the Son, and all of a sudden his eyes open, and he's like, not today, Father. He's mine. Because if he could get him into that confession, it would drive the demon out like that. But he wouldn't let him. So the exorcist himself is a designated priest in the diocese, and no priest has that power unless it has been given to him by the bishop. That's why obedience to our bishop, laity, priests, all of it, like the demonic lives by law. I know we don't like rules a lot of the times. I don't either. But they know what the church is and who is in charge. We had a situation in which a pastor who was a Lutheran, his daughter got semi-possessed playing with a Ouija board, which, by the way, if you have them in your houses, take them out and burn them. It's like one of the quickest keys into our kids' life and the demonic into their lives. And she just went stiff as a board, and they couldn't move her. It took like 6 grown men to get her up. He tried praying scripture over her, nothing. She would laugh at his face from time to time, and so they took him to the exorcist, and by the time he got to the exorcist, all this foam was coming out of her mouth, and there's all these bitty little hooks in the foam. In the middle of the exorcism, she stands up straight, runs up the wall, across the ceiling, down the other wall, and boom, right back on the floor, and she was delivered. Praise God. But the only one that the demon would answer to was the priest. And when you get into the Protestant world, they know this. And so they bring them to the priest, and even I bring them to the exorcist. Or the bishop, who is the main exorcist of the diocese. The greatest exorcist probably ever to live was Gabriel Amorth. He's dead now. He's the Pope's exorcist, lead exorcist in Rome. He did over 100,000 exorcisms. He actually has a video that you can rent. It might be on Amazon. It's The Devil and Me, Gabriel Amorth. And before he died, he allowed one to be filmed. It is fascinating to watch, and I highly recommend it. Not with your children. But he was known for the saying, there's like one guy, a reporter asked him, "Aren't you afraid of the devil?" He kind of had one of those old smoker voices, and he's like, "No, the devil should be afraid of me." So I can't stress enough, despite people's frustration and fascination with the demonic and exorcisms and everything else, that the sacraments of the church are the most important. Live within them and try to live a good and holy life, and you're good to go. Regular Mass and confession and a life of virtue and prayer is the surest way to be safe, especially in this time. And ladies and gentlemen, for whatever reason, all of these people that unlocked the gates of hell, that brought the demonic in, there is more demonic influence in the world now that has ever possibly existed. And the remnant of the church is very small. And we are under the greatest assault and attack that maybe we've ever been under, except for the very early persecutions of the church in Rome. But it is also in these areas where we are the most powerful, in a time that we can be the most holy, and where great saints would have envied the war that we're in because of the glory that we're giving God. So go to confession. Stay true to prayer and regular Mass. Be cognizant that the devil wants your soul. And stay in the church.